everybody, and welcome to another episode of My JavaScript Story. This week we're talking to Ethan Brown. Ethan, do you want to say hello?
Hi.
Now, Ethan is the Director of Engineering at Value Management Strategies. We had him on episode 333 of JavaScript Jabber, where we talked about the things you know, things you need to know, and a few you can skip in JavaScript in 2018. Of course, now it's 2019, so you have another version of this coming out, or?
Yeah, it'll be a whole different list this year.
Oh, really?
Such is the nature of the beast. As a matter of fact, I think when I did that episode, I was referring to a talk I gave at Node Interactive the year before, and already an article I'd been interviewed for, and already I had said, well, a couple of these things I said you didn't need to know. Now I think you do need to know, and the ecosystem just changes so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at Sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at Sentry.io. And yeah, I think we talked about, how you decided what things needed to go in the list and things like that. But yeah, I kind of want to back up and get your story.
Sure.
We're here to talk about that, talk about you, a little less about the article or the talk. So, how did you get into programming?
Well, I was homeschooled. My sister and I both were homeschooled from an early age. My dad is an electrical engineer, and I thought I was going to become an electrical engineer up until we got our first computer. Before that, I was twiddling around with breadboards and, learning how to make things with digital ICs and stringing together resistors and capacitors and transistors and all that. And then that
was me in high school. That's what I did. So I feel you.
Yeah. Ironically now, I guess the grass is always greener now. Sometimes I think, oh man, I wish I'd gone into electrical engineering. But computers are great. And certainly, when I was a kid and we got our first computer, I thought, oh, why am I messing around with ICs when this computer, this multi-purpose machine will do anything I ask it to. And I can't even remember what my first, what you would call a computer is. I think it was one of those little NEC, wedge-shaped NEC things that I guess resembled the laptop of the day, but it's, certainly nothing we would call a laptop today.
Right.
I wrote stuff in BASIC, and I remember distinctly it didn't have any kind of persistent memory, but you could back up your programs to, I'm not kidding, audio cassette tape. So there was a little acoustic adapter, and it would play back like the modem sounds, and you would record it on a cassette tape, and then you could play the cassette tape back and load it into memory. It was and now looking back at that, it's just so bizarre to imagine that we did things that way.
Yeah.
Of course, my dad, he worked with some of the early computers, and so I would remember him bringing home punch cards, and so it's a whole different era. So that's how I got started with programming, and then we got a PC relatively quickly, I guess in the early, maybe mid '80s, and I played around with whatever languages were available. I think Pascal was where I started most of my programming education, all the beloved Borland products. And
good old days.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
And I was precocious. I think, one of the advantages of being a homeschooler in my generation was I'm among the first generation of what I would call institutionalized homeschooling. I mean, obviously people have been doing it forever, but when I was growing up, it started to become a thing that people were writing books about, and there were communities, and it was
Right.
a little more in the social consciousness. And so we had a lot of opportunities, and there was a certain I guess impression that we were sort of Wunder kids, which I don't know how well deserved that was, but that was sort of the impression. But it did have, I did enjoy the nice opportunities. We sort of subscribe to the John Holt, unschooling method, where the idea is you follow less of a curriculum and you just explore whatever you want. And, predictably, perhaps my sister explored arts topics and I explored computers, and, I had a lot of opportunity to really focus on that. I sort of maybe didn't get as much general education as I should have. I corrected that when I went to university, but
Right.
it was definitely an interesting way to do things. So, the opportunity for me was, my dad, he retired from the Navy. He was on the engineering side,
Mm-hmm.
and he started a company selling video data collection electronics for scientists and engineers. And he needed some software written to collect some of that data for, PC side processing. And so he asked for my help. And so, my first commercial software was being sold when I was 16, which was, pretty exciting.
Wow.
And, an interesting way to get started. I look back now and it seems pretty small potatoes, but at the time I was proud of it.
Yep. That's awesome. So you get in, you're writing code. You said you went to university. Did you study computer science there? Or?
I did, but there was a gap. And as a matter of fact, I was just listening to the previous episode with Charles Lowell.
Yeah.
And interestingly, he and I had some overlap in our experience. I did go back to school, but there's a little story in between there. So I was writing the software for my dad's company, and he was selling his devices to a defense contractor in New Jersey. We were living in Virginia at the time, and I can't remember how the conversation went, but I'm sure they were like, "Hey, we love your devices," and he got to talking about the software, and it came up that I wrote it, and they were like, "Oh, would he like a job?" So at the young age of 17, I moved off to New Jersey to take a job as a quote unquote professional programmer, and that was a wonderful experience. I got exposed to different languages. That's where I learned C++. And I was working in an optical lab, which was really interesting. So I was doing a lot of hardware interfacing. So there's a lot of GPIB and things like that, controlling hardware from a PC. And I did that for a couple of years. And, I started to notice that, and this is definitely not the case now, but back then, all of my peers had degrees in computer science, and they were making significantly more money than I was. And so I just sort of got the message that, what you did to advance your career was go get a degree. So I did. I went back to university. I was majoring in computer science, and one of the questions I always get from prospective programmers is, do you really need to know math or be good at math to do programming? And I sort of have a nuanced answer to that, because growing up, I hated math. I was bad at it. I was frustrated by it. And as a computer science student, I had to take calculus, up to calculus. And so I was in this calculus class with nothing but bad experiences with math and having hated it the whole way. And I sort of had my math epiphany in calculus all of a sudden. It started to come together and I got it. And all of a sudden, trigonometry was making sense and algebra was making sense. And not only was it making sense, it actually became interesting. And then I took another math class and another math class and another. And then finally, at one point, my advisor was like, well, you're just a few credits away from a math degree as well, right? So I ended up coming out of university with 2 degrees, which was, I was really proud of the math degree because even though I acquired a taste for it, I was never particularly good at it. And, every B that I struggled for in a math class, I was way more proud of than the A's I got in computer science.
Yeah, I get that. The math classes were really hard. I was a computer engineering major.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to take a few more math classes and a few more engineering classes and a few fewer computer science classes. But I definitely went through a lot of what you're describing. The thing that I thought was funny is that computer science, there was definitely overlap with the math. Computer engineering, there was a ton of overlap with the math. And so you were like 2 classes away from getting a math minor. And of course, so that meant that I went and got me an Italian minor. I always thought it was funny. It was like, why go take the last 2 classes to get the math minor? If you graduate with a computer engineering degree, they know you can do the math. So,
right.
But yeah, anyway. But yeah, that's really interesting. So you have degrees in both?
Yes.
Very cool. Have you been able to apply both?
Well, certainly I've applied the computer science degree, that's been my profession. And, I take a pretty philosophical approach to the, debate about whether degrees in computer science are worth it or are they still relevant. And I kind of feel like people are asking the wrong question. Certainly if you don't really care for formalized education and you don't want to be in a classroom and you don't, sort of respect that system, you're probably not going to get something out of a degree. But if you enjoy academics and you enjoy the, academic environment and having professors and, other people that are like-minded, then I think you get a ton out of a degree in computer science. And so I think there's dialogue about, you want to be a programmer, should you bother with a degree in computer science? And, my answer is that, well, it depends. It depends on you and what you like and what you're interested in. And of course, what your means. I think the ascendancy of code schools is really indicative of the fact that a lot of people want to get into this field, but maybe don't have the resources or privilege to, go get a 4-year degree at a university.
Yeah. For me, one of my big things, it's one of the values that we espouse at devchat.tv, but it's also, I get to set that because I own the company, but it's interesting to me that, we have the conversation about should people get 4-year degrees, and my question in return is, what's the outcome you want?
Right.
Yeah,
I think that's a great question, and that's that's one of the questions you should be asking. For me, it was a no-brainer. I really love being in an academic environment. It was my days at university were some of the most fun in my life. And I have a long-term plan to go back and get a PhD and just sort of retire into teaching. So it depends. It does exactly depend on what you're looking for. And I would add to that going to university is not going to be the only way to achieve success as a programmer. If that's what you want, if that's your objective, certainly you should look at computer science programs, but it's not the only way.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of what I'm driving at when I ask, what's the outcome, right? Because if you want the degree, that then
right.
then that's the outcome, right? If you want the experience, if you want the journey of going through college, then
right.
I'm not going to argue with you. You're getting the outcome you want.
Yeah.
If you just want a job writing software, look at all the options and decide which one's going to get you there and get you the kind of job you want.
Exactly.
And there are definite trade-offs there.
Right. And I think there are also other options too. I really think that there's some excellent master's options that you don't even need an undergraduate degree. So I know people who have, started a programming career and they spent, 5 years programming, and then they sort of start to want to know more and understand things at a deeper level. And there are really solid master's programs out there for working adults who want to sort of get that deeper foundation. And then, you're getting a more impressive credential in the end.
Yep. And again, that's all down to the outcome you want. So
exactly.
So anyway, when you graduated from college, how did you get your first job?
Trying to remember. I remember what my first job out of university was. I was working for a defense contractor just outside of Richmond, Virginia. And honestly, I don't remember how I got it. Maybe I responded to an advertisement in the newspaper, or maybe it was a job fair. I don't think it was a personal connection. I know a lot of the jobs I've gotten in my life have been personal connections, but I don't think that one was. That was a great job. We were doing load planning software for the joint DoD. So, the military has a huge challenge in getting people and equipment from point A to point B. And the company I was working for was doing the software that said, if you need, this many tanks and this many Jeeps and, this many portable generators, and they all have these shapes and the way they can fit on the bed of a C-130, and, how do you arrange them? So there's a lot of, spatial organization. It was actually graphical, which was really neat, for the time, because that was 1989, 1990. And so, you could see the bed of the C-130 with the outlines of all the pallets that were laid down. So, I really had a good, interesting first job out of college, doing some actual heavy lifting.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So how did you wind up getting from doing this kind of thing to JavaScript?
I was thinking about this as I was getting ready to do this interview. I don't remember the first Java, certainly I don't remember my first line of JavaScript or everything. Like a lot of people, I just sort of was, in one way or another caught up in web development work, whether it was, helping someone build their own website or working on a web interface. One of my very early jobs was working for Informix when they were one of the 4 big database vendors. And they were working on a web-based admin interface for their databases. And so I worked on that team. So, it was very gradual for me, the transition from desktop software to web-based software. It just, I was doing more and more projects that were on the web. And of course, as that happened, I ended up doing more and more JavaScript. So it was kind of like, the frog in the pot of water. I was boiled by JavaScript instead of thrown into the boiling water. And I was also trying to remember what my first Node application was, and that would have been at Pop Art. So prior to the job I'm at now, I was working at a marketing agency that had a focus on like web applications and mobile applications. And I sort of brought Node and JavaScript, sort of as a JavaScript-centric development stack to that company. It was pretty .NET centric before that. We were doing a lot of ASP.NET, and I certainly have no issue with ASP.NET or C#. I think C# is a great language, and I think Microsoft looked at all the mistakes that Java had made and didn't make them. They made their own mistakes, of course, but I don't think they were as entrenched in their mistakes as Sun and later Oracle were. So I didn't. It wasn't as if I was fleeing .NET because I didn't like .NET. I was going to JavaScript because I really was intrigued by the the focus of having one language on the front end and the back end. Our jobs are so complicated, and there's so much you have to know. Any opportunity I saw to simplify the tools I use on a day-to-day basis was really valuable.
Yeah, definitely interesting. So it sounds like you're using Node on the back end and JavaScript on the front end. What does your stack look like?
So you essentially outlined it in a nutshell. We are on the AWS platform, and we are doing all serverless right now. So all of our server-side JavaScript comes in the form of AWS Lambdas.
Oh, wow.
On the front end, it's all React and Redux. We're also using a library that I believe I mentioned the last time I spoke to you, called AutoMerge, which I guess fits somewhere in the panoply of state management libraries. It's sort of an interest. Maybe I would call it an adjunct to that. Like, you would use it in conjunction with a state management library. And interestingly, we may end up dropping it just because I don't, it's great for what it does, but I'm not sure it's going to get me to my long-term vision of how we want to do state management. But that's neither here nor there. And in terms of front-end libraries, we're also using Ant Design. I've always really liked Bootstrap. I like the simplicity of it, and as a primarily back-end person, I like that I can make things that don't look hideous relatively easily. The problem is it doesn't really offer a ton in terms of functionality. Like, if you need a robust front-end toolkit, it doesn't give you much. So we went with Ant Design, which is extremely robust, not perfect. I'm not sure anything in this space is, but it would have taken us years to write what it gives you out of the box. So,
yep. Very cool. So what have you done in JavaScript that you're particularly proud of? I mean, we ran across your, JavaScript 2018. What do you need to know? What can you skip? So it seems like most of, at least what I've been able to find, has been, in the form of blog posts or talks. Is that primarily where you focus as far as what you do in the community, or have I missed some open source somewhere? Or?
No, I haven't hit it big in the open source space yet. I would love to. I do have some ideas. Everybody and their brother, I think, has ideas about, or their sister has ideas about state management these days, and I've got my own take on how that should be done. The whole state management space is just so Wild West right now, and it's interesting because all of them are good ideas. You look at MobX, and you look at Redux, and you look at all the little flavors and variants, and they've all got something to offer. Apollo, it's crazy out there, and so I suppose it's not particularly original that I've got my own idea about how that all can work. The question is, am I going to have the time and space to actually operationalize it and formalize it? And then the follow-up question is, will it be any good? So I've contributed to a couple of larger open source projects, but not to the point that anyone would recognize my name in a commit log or anything.
Right.
So yeah, cool. No. No big open source credits yet.
That's fine. I mean, I feel like content sometimes gets downplayed. I mean, unless you go big, right? So, I don't feel like I've been slighted, but JavaScript Jabber is a fairly well received show.
Yeah, absolutely.
But a lot of times, somebody will write a blog post and it'll circulate among a few hundred or a few thousand people, and it doesn't get the credit that open source gets, or people writing documentation that doesn't get the credit that open source, like writing the code, gets. But without that stuff, a lot of times people are lost.
Right.
And so I like to highlight all of it. And I'm curious with this too, with speaking and writing. I mean, what are you generally aiming for? Are you trying to just help people figure out what direction to head in, or are there particular topics you want to help make sure people understand better? Or
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, obviously, I like to hear myself talk, so
I have that problem.
I'm not going to lie. Part of it is ego fueled. It feels good to be accepted to talk somewhere. It makes you feel like you know something. But I put a lot of thought into what I pitch for talks. You don't nobody. I mean, I don't know. Maybe if you're Dan Abramoff, people come to you and are like, oh, hey, would you like to talk? But I have to work at it. I probably submit a dozen conference proposals a year to get the one or two that might actually be accepted. So that's an interesting process. I think the topics I've been successful in, the talks that I have had, I've done a good job in recognizing what people are really interested in hearing about, which is a real tightrope, because if you pick something too cutting edge, not enough people know about it for it to be interesting. And if you pick something too established, everyone's tired of hearing about it.
Right.
So you sort of have to hit that sweet spot. And it was the same with pitching books to O'Reilly. I really got lucky with Express because I just happened to be working with Express right at that sweet spot. And I said to them, hey, look, you don't have a book on Express, and, there are a couple that just came out, and, a lot more people are using it. So I just got really lucky with timing. So, it's the same with talks. You just have to, especially if you don't have, if your name isn't followed by Microsoft or Facebook or GitHub or whatever, I think if you work for one of the big companies, you have an easier time landing conference talks.
I mean, it still depends on, I don't know. There are still things that, because Microsoft may or may not promote you. Right. I mean, it adds credibility to a certain degree, but yeah.
And in no way am I trying to slight the people who work at those companies who do get talks. I mean, they're there for a reason, and generally they're talking about really interesting stuff. So they're doing their homework too.
Yeah.
I just think they have a little bit of a leg up due to name recognition.
Well, they also have a leg up because typically they're the people who are working on or directly with the technologies, or the teams that build the technologies that people want to hear about.
Right. Exactly.
And so it's mostly a level of access thing. But yeah. So what are you working on these days?
Well, we have a big project right now for a public sector client, which I'm not going to talk too much about.
Fair enough.
But we, the interesting challenge we're facing right now as a company is, VMS is an established company with a good revenue stream, all on the professional services side. So we're really trying to do a startup within an established company, which is a really interesting model. It's nice that, we have a stable company to, pay our salaries, and we're not diluting, as a company, we're not diluting our equity because we don't need VC, but it comes with its own challenges. And trying to do software. Well, I'll just say that there are definitely different challenges in that environment, and like anywhere else, you have to think hard about what's worth pursuing and how much time and effort you can dedicate on things. There's always pressure to deliver. The interesting thing about the project we're working on is one piece of software. It's sort of this monolithic application that I guess you could say is in the information logistics space. It's about making better decisions, and it's about risk analysis. And so if you're trying to make complicated decisions, VMS Pro is really geared towards helping you with that. And we have a client right now who's doing something that's, there's a lot of overlap with that, and they came to us and said, hey, we've worked with you as a consultant, we really love your work, and we have this problem you'd like to solve. And we looked at it and we said, oh, well, there's a lot of overlap with what our software does, so we're going to take our product and we're going to augment it with those features. And so we're essentially getting paid a little bit to help develop functionality on our own project, which, again, it's an interesting business model. And, I have an MBA too. And one of the things we talked about a lot is the importance of sort of hybridized business models. The business world is so complicated these days. It's really hard to succeed in a crowded business environment if you just have a single business model. And so developing hybrid models is really a key to innovation oftentimes. So I know that's all very vague, but this also isn't a business show, so I don't want to really get too far in the weeds on that.
No, it's all good. One other thing, I was at a podcasting conference this last week. In fact, the plane landed at like midnight last night. So, but yeah, one of the things, I was in a session where they were talking about interviewing people, and one of the questions that somebody brought up, and I don't remember exactly where, but really intrigued me, so I'm going to ask this, even though it wasn't on the list of questions I sent you, is in your career, was there a turning point for you at any point where things changed, or a struggle that you had to overcome that you think people would benefit from hearing about?
Sure. The one that comes to mind for me was I was working at Oracle, and
I've heard of them.
Yeah. I crossed the tracks to take a job in the QA department as a senior QA engineer. I was sort of interested to sort of round out my experience in the dev world, with the idea that it would make me sort of a better, more holistic developer. And that part of it was fine. I mean, I'm glad I got some exposure to the work that QA entails. But what was really difficult about that experience was that I was working on a project with a large team, and that project never saw the light of day. We probably worked on it for a year and a half. I mean, people had been working on it for 6 months before I showed up, and then I worked on it for a year. And then Oracle acquired a company, and it made the project we were working on redundant. And so Oracle said, well, we're going to cancel that project. And so in a lot of ways, I felt like I had a year and a half of my efforts just flushed down the toilet. And, I mean, this happens in business. It's not, it's inevitable. And so I'm not, crying over it. But it did really underscore to me how important it was to, not just work for the paycheck, because the paycheck from Oracle was great. I'm not going to lie about that. And the benefits were fantastic. But for me, it drove home that it was about them being connected to what we're trying to do. And even if that project hadn't been canceled, I didn't really have a passion for what we were trying to do. I mean, I cared, I was trying to be a good craftsman, but like it wasn't, something that really motivated me. So after that job, I sort of twiddled around doing sort of private contracts for a while. And I was definitely in a funk. I wasn't, I was thinking about leaving software engineering altogether. I thought about, like going into something like law enforcement, where I felt like I could have a direct impact on the community, or, do something more helpful or beneficial to society. And I ended up in, I guess it seems weird, but I ended up at Pop Art, the marketing company. And, you might think, oh, wow, you were looking for something meaningful and you went to a marketing company. And while that may seem contradictory, it was a good company trying to do good things, which I appreciated. And then there were two things that really reignited my passion for software development. One is because we were a marketing agency, there were a lot of creative types there. We worked with, graphic designers and UX designers, and there was just a lot more focus on creative energy, which was really invigorating. And then also, I don't know if you've ever worked in the agency world, but one of the things that marks the agency world, I think, is the pace of work. There's no Oracle like year-and-a-half projects that you can just can.
So true. Yeah, my first job was at an agency.
Yeah, you have like 2 months to launch a website, and then you've got a mobile app to deliver in a month, and then 3 more websites in the next 3 months, and it just has to get done. And the downside, of course, is there's no time for real thoughtful engineering, and you're not building things to last or being really innovative in architecture or anything. You're leveraging tools to get a job done. And while it ended up becoming tiring, and I wanted to do really good sound engineering after a few years, at first it was great, and it was such an anodyne to the sort of slug-like pace of big companies, and it was just great doing things and getting them out the door and seeing them in the world. It was almost intoxicating.
Yeah. So yeah, I was freelance for 6 years, but yeah, my first job was at an agency. One of the things that drove me crazy was that people would pay me insane amounts of money and then never launch. And so I definitely identify with that. And then, yeah, at the same time, it's like, man, look at what we made in like 2 months. So
yeah, it's nice to get something done.
Yep. Very cool. Well, the last thing I'm going to ask you before we get to picks is, where do people find you online?
So I have a Twitter handle at Ethan R. Brown. I don't tweet a ton, but if I'm ever at a conference or anything, or I come across interesting links, Twitter is usually the best place to look for me. You can check out my professional profile at the VMS website. That's vms-inc.com. And obviously, if you search for Ethan Brown O'Reilly, you'll find my books. And I am working on a second edition of Web Development with Node and Express, which I believe we're planning on being out this fall. So
nice.
look for that.
Cool. Yeah, I put a link in the chat, which will go into the show notes for the earlier edition. But yeah, folks, hold off.
There's also JavaScript if you're really dying to read one of my books, and that's current.
Nice. All right. Well, do you have any picks for us?
I was also thinking about this before a meeting with you, and I was like, gosh, I can't think of any picks other than the things I gave you last time. So, again, I'll plug Cooper Press. I really think those guys do they'll do a better job than I will of being able to pick anything. Look through their list of publications, subscribe to the ones that interest you. I subscribe to React Weekly, and I can't remember what the name of the serverless one is, and JavaScript Weekly. And every week I find something interesting to read. So props to those guys and the work they're doing. And just because I don't have anything great, I'll throw out a sort of fun one. I really have enjoyed regex crosswords a lot. So there's a whole website devoted to regex crosswords. And so if you want to waste a few hours solving little interesting regex puzzles, then just Google regex crosswords and you'll be entertained.
Sounds so fascinating. Nice. I'm going to jump in here with a few picks of my own. So one is, and I can hold it up to the camera for Ethan, but no one else to see it because I haven't been publishing the videos. But it's called the what is this? The Power List, and it's put together by the MF CEO Project, which is a podcast done by a guy named Andy Frisella. It's a podcast that I listen to. But essentially, what it is it gives you it's a journal, and it gives you one page where you write down the 5 things you're going to do to win today, and then on the other side is just an area for notes. But if you get all 5 things that you put down, then you win. And the other thing, and there's not really any literature in the in the journal. I mean, that's pretty much it. Oh, it is. It's right here at the beginning. It says, and I'm just going to read this real quick. It says, once a task has been on your power list for 21 days straight and been completed all 21 days in a row, it is considered a habit that you will complete automatically and must be dropped from the list and replaced by a new critical task. So my first two things are things that I'm trying to get in the habit of doing. And so one of them is running, and I've been training for a marathon. I've talked about that on the show before. But another one is just getting back on keto and doing that right to get my diabetes under control. And really the goal there is to qualify for affordable term life insurance. Because if something happens to me, I don't want to leave my wife high and dry. So with 5 kids, that would suck. So anyway, so that's one pick. And then, the other pick that I have, and I mentioned Podfest at the last, on the last episode of this show, which I actually recorded like 2 hours ago. But one thing that came out of it, and I'm just going to call out a couple of these things. And this is something I'm going to be doing, so keep an eye out on my Twitter feed and things like that. But people were talking at Podfest about audiograms and what they are. They're 1-minute videos that you can post to social media. And of course, I produce a little bit of audio, throughout the week. So, I thought, oh, well, that's perfect because it's, you can kind of get a gold nugget out of the show, and then you can share it on social media. And so what you do is you pull it out, get some graphic to go on it. You can animate it if you want, and then you put it up on social media. And people are more likely to watch a 1-minute video than an 1.5-hour video or an hour-long video, with the podcast artwork. And, and so then they can click through and it can, hey, subscribe, or hey, listen to the episode or whatever. So I'm going to be doing that. The tools that they mentioned, so I better link all this stuff. So audiograms. And then the tools that I was told to use, there are companies out there that will just do them for you. There were like 3 of them at Podfest. But it, I'll just hire somebody and teach them how to do it. So one of them is called Snappa, and it's a really simple editor. What is it? Image editor, but it's made for these kinds of media. And so, it kind of gives you a place to write captions and things like that. And then the other one, and this is one that will help you publish it once you've written it, is Wave. And it's wavve.co. And we'll have links to them in the show notes. But yeah, so that's what people have told me to use. And, I think between the two, the subscription across both of them is like $30 a month. So really, really approachable. So if you're doing content, there's some stuff. I am seriously considering starting a podcast about doing podcasts. I've also been talking to some folks, and it also looks like we're going to be launching shows over the next few months. And these are ones that actually have traction. So it's gone beyond just an idea. One is open source sustainability and maintainability, and the other one is data science. So if you are interested in either of those topics, then keep an eye out on devchat.tv as we get those launched. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Those are my picks. So yeah. So thanks for coming, Ethan.
Yeah, absolutely. Nice picks.
We'll go ahead and wrap this up, and we will be back next week. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.